Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Big T Anderson, and this is Fighter by Luthien Luinwe. Now, if you're new here, both the art and the fanfiction are not mine. Links down below to both the artist's page as well as the fanfiction writer. Give them some love, you know what to do with that. I'm just Schmucky Duck reading it. There's something special with this one that kind of pulled me in. I will go with it, but I'll explain that afterwards. So, let's begin. Lupus didn't care. Lupus didn't care that Dick Grayson was only 24 and in the prime of his crime-fighting life. Lupus didn't care that he had a good, stable job at the Bloodhaven Police Department. And Lupus certainly didn't care that he had a girlfriend he loved dearly and wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And he wasn't entirely sure she could deal with this. Any of it. He had first noticed it in his knees. He had woken up one morning with a dull ache in both of them, but he wasn't too worried. He'd been fighting crime since he was 9. For God's sake, he dislocated both kneecaps more times than he could count. Not to mention hyperextensions and other injuries. It was probably nothing. At least, nothing to be too concerned about. He was a goddamn vigilante. He was bound to have a few aches and pains. The pain had come and gone, and he had dealt with it as best as he could. And then the headache had started, but it was flu season, and he had just assumed he was catching the local strain that had been circulating around the station. But the headache had lasted for weeks, not days, and he showed no signs of shaking it any time soon. But all of that had been bearable, until he found himself sleeping for 15 hours a day. Missing work, patrols, and barely being able to function during the few hours he actually was awake. He had thought maybe he'd gotten mono. It wasn't impossible. Jason had gotten it when he was a teenager. It seemed like the symptoms are similar. Yeah, it was probably mono. He'd just sleep it off. He'd been lying in bed. His phone had been going off. But he'd been too damn exhausted to just roll over and answer it, so he wasn't too surprised when a few hours later he heard a knock at the door, followed by some not-so-quiet yelling, "Grayson, open this door before I kick it in!" Damien. Of course it was Damien. Dick had missed their weekly dinner with Bruce and Alfred and been too exhausted and just too achy to go. He'd forgotten to text the family to let them know. He shut his eyes and took a deep breath. It took every ounce of energy he had in him to open the door. And he looked like shit. He was wearing the same sweatpants he put on a few nights before and never bothered to get out of. His shirt was crumpled and stained. He hadn't combed his hair in what felt like an eternity. "Hey, Damie," he greeted, kicking himself for not being able to hide the fatigue in his voice. "Good. You are alive." He seemed to approve, then frown. "You look terrible. Are you ill?" "I'll get over it soon." Dick just nodded and promised, hoping to God Damien would just go home. He didn't even have the energy to sit and talk. He had gone to the doctor and explained his symptoms. He had been told he's probably just depressed. No, though that felt different. He knew that even if he would never admit it to another living soul. Or maybe his thyroid was out of whack, but every damn test had come back fine. Weeks went by. The aches started appearing in his elbows, his shoulders, even the joints on his fingers. He could barely walk some days, barely function on most. Nightwing just hadn't been in Bloodhaven in almost 2 months. The crime rate had skyrocketed, and he had just sat there, lying in his bed, not being able to do a damn thing about it. "We never go out anymore. We barely even talk. What's going on?" Corey had said on a long, draining phone call. "I don't know." Because in all honesty, he didn't know why he was sleeping all the time. He didn't know why he could barely remember the things he was told even seconds after being told them. He didn't know why going out in the sun for even short periods of time caused him to get burned. He didn't know why his body had suddenly decided to crap out on him. "You need to figure it out then. I can't keep doing this." He wanted to fight, to argue that she didn't understand, to point out that he didn't even understand what was happening. He wasn't being lazy. He wasn't ignoring her. He just couldn't do anything anymore. So he had gone to another doctor and relayed his symptoms again, going home with a shiny new prescription for a steroid and prescription strength Advil to take for 2 weeks. The doctor had said he'd be back to normal. They sent him to a sleep specialist who had confirmed that no, it wasn't a sleep-related issue, and then the 2 weeks passed. The joint pain had gotten worse. His lower back was constantly hurting, and he knew that couldn't have meant anything good. He was sleeping 18 hours a day. The stupid rash was going across his cheeks and nose and it appeared, and it burned. Dear God, it burned. He had trudged through the door to his apartment, threw his bag wherever it fell, and all but collapsed onto his couch, not even registering that Bruce was already sitting there until he heard the man speak. "Dick?" He had stated, full of almost concern. He must have really been losing it. "What's going on? Nightwing's been missing for weeks. You haven't been missing. Some of the league thought that you were..." And Dick just completely broken down, crying ugly tears, sobbing violently. Bruce had to hold him and ask him what was wrong, but Dick just shook his head. Because how could he explain what was wrong when everyone kept telling him he was fine? "I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me." So Bruce demanded Dick return to the manor with him. Dick didn't even have enough fight left in him to argue. Bruce took him to Alfred. Alfred took him to Leslie. And Leslie sent him to the goddamn emergency room. Before he was pumped full of fluids and more steroids and told to go back home, he would be fine in a few days. Bruce, Alfred, and Leslie had all argued with his doctors about that. After his hospital stint, Bruce had taken him to see yet another doctor, and Dick was relieved that this doctor had actually listened and believed him. Had Dick told that he told Dick that he just wasn't crazy, that it wasn't all probably in his head. And the doctor had ordered more blood work than Dick had originally thought possible. And he had waited 3 weeks, agonizing weeks, to get that blood work back, to be told that his ANA had come back positive, and that the doctor had sent a referral to a rheumatologist, whose office couldn't see the young vigilante for months, but he didn't care, because that meant he wasn't crazy, and that there was something wrong with him, and he could live with that. He had sat and talked with his rheumatologist for a solid 3 hours, being told the worst and best news of his life. He wasn't crazy. He was sick. He would be sick for the rest of his life, but it was treatable. He would have good days, even though his life had changed forever. Lupus didn't care. It didn't care that Dick Grayson was only 24 and in the prime of his crime-fighting life. Lupus didn't care that he had a good, stable job at the Bloodhaven Police Department, and Lupus certainly didn't care that it had caused him to lose a girlfriend he had loved and wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Dick was a fighter. He'd been a fighter even before Bruce had taken him under his wing, and he was going to fight it. And he was going to win. So, people are like, well, that's an odd pick. And it's like, well, here's the thing people often forget. Writing allows you to kind of be not only the valve for pressures in your life, but also adds a little bit of your life to the characters. I know a lot of this struck home for me because I don't have lupus, but I do have beriberi. So I have a lot of nerve damage that has come through, and That I can completely understand. I know that feeling. So this one I had to kind of put on the list because it struck a chord, and I had to. Anyway, if you like it, let me know. Show some love. Ta-ta for now.